This boy hides a secret inside him that will completely transform him. A person is at the center of a circle with a visible mark under their right eye. Around them, a group of individuals watches with attention. Among them lies the body of someone, while a woman is tied to a noose. One of the people documents the entire scene with a camera, while the others immobilize and strangle her. Piper is a girl whose visual impairment only allows her to distinguish lights and silhouettes, which gives her eyes a peculiar look. This peculiarity causes many of her peers to reject her or even make fun of her. Fortunately, her stepbrother Andy takes it upon himself to protect her from hurtful comments. At home, Andy is outside trying to fix the rearview mirror of his car when he hears Piper, worried, calling him. Their father does not answer or open the bathroom door. Alarmed, Andy hurries to force the lock with the help of a knife. He warns his father that he is going in, but the silence makes him suspect that something is not right. Upon entering, he finds the room full of steam from the running shower, and on the floor, the lifeless body of his father. Andy is in a state of shock. Piper, sensing his silence, fears the worst and, guided by touch, gets close to her father's body. Upon confirming it, she screams desperately. Andy, not knowing how to react, remains motionless. The loss affects them deeply. Although he had overcome chemotherapy and seemed to be recovered, no one can understand what happened. Without parents and with Andy still a minor, the state assumes custody of both. A social worker named Wendy informs them that Piper will be sent to a temporary mother named Laura, whom she describes as a kind person. Andy, being close to coming of age, will be assigned to a supervised living facility. Although Wendy warns them that Laura has had problems with difficult children, as Andy was in his childhood, their desire to stay together is stronger. Andy promises to behave for the next 3 months until he turns 18 and can apply for custody of Piper. When it is time to leave, Piper resists. Andy comforts her by saying that their father took a plane to the sky and gives her a pillow with his scent. They both leave for a new home under a sky that begins to light up, a symbol of a new beginning. Soon after, the siblings arrive at a house surrounded by trees with a white line along the entrance. There, they are greeted by Laura, who is enthusiastic about Piper, but almost completely ignores Andy. She doesn't remember his name, doesn't pay attention to him, and when taking a photo, tries to leave him out of the frame. She introduces them to Pompon, her taxidermied dog, and mentions she has a cat named Youngman. Andy notices a raised design on the floor and asks if it is for Piper. Laura, visibly affected, explains that it was for her daughter Katie, who shared the same disability as Piper, but unfortunately drowned. Until a call from the social worker Wendy interrupts her. While she is on the phone, the siblings decide to explore the backyard. As they open the sliding door, Laura warns them too late not to let the cat out. The animal's meow guides him to an empty pool where he finds a boy with a shaved head and no shirt on, holding the cat that is trying to escape. Laura soon appears and runs towards them, stepping over a sign that says, "Katie was here." She manages to take the cat from the boy, who turns around to reveal an expressionless look and a mark under his right eye. After what happened, Laura gathers the three of them to measure their height and takes the opportunity to tell them that the boy's name is Oliver. She explains that he lost his father and that, after Katie's death, he developed selective mutism, which justifies his silence with strangers. When Piper asks for a description, Andy describes him as a nice boy who is smiling at her. Laura reinforces the lie by saying he has red curly hair. Andy, however, feels confused and still does not know what to think of Laura. Then they decide to unpack. Laura accompanies Piper to her new room, while Andy checks if she is okay using their keyword grapefruit, which they both use to be completely honest with each other. Upon confirming she is, Andy goes to his room, which turns out to be much less welcoming than Piper's. Soon after, Laura appears, having already learned that Andy plans to apply for custody of his sister. She reveals herself to be a therapist and tries to get Andy to talk about how he feels after his father's death. However, Andy refuses, as he doesn't trust her. The situation worsens when he discovers her checking his phone. Annoyed, he snatches the phone from her abruptly, though he immediately apologizes. Laura, visibly scared, leaves, but not before clarifying that she read the messages where Andy refers to Oliver as someone very strange. Andy's reaction was not the smartest, as Laura could influence the suitability evaluation for getting custody of Piper. To relieve stress, Andy decides to work out while Piper changes her bed pillows for her father's. From a distance, Laura watches her without her noticing. In the evening, the lights go out and Laura puts on a tape that shows a ritual similar to the one at the beginning. Soon after, Andy, unable to fall asleep, notices that the garden lights turn on. He looks out the window and sees Laura leading Oliver to the shed. This fact only increases Andy's suspicions about the secrets that Laura might be hiding. At dawn, Laura wakes up before everyone else, performs some repairs on the pool, and then sits to contemplate the sky as if waiting for the rain. Meanwhile, Andy wakes up startled, covered in saliva and with wet clothes. So that Laura won't notice, he takes them to the laundry room and tries to shower. But the sound of the water makes him relive the moment when Piper, desperate, tried to revive her father. That day, the funeral takes place. Laura decides to accompany them, and for that, she leaves Oliver locked in his room. At the funeral, while those present offer their condolences, Laura discreetly steps aside, approaches the body, and secretly cuts a lock of hair with scissors. She then convinces Andy to go back to the coffin, assuring him that many believe the spirit remains in the body for months. She insists that he give him a farewell kiss, and although Andy resists, he finally agrees. However, Laura takes the situation to the extreme by suggesting a kiss on the mouth, claiming it is a tradition. Given Andy's refusal, she does it herself. Seeing his father lifeless was already painful, but Laura's pressure seems to have a more disturbing purpose. And why does she want that lock of hair? What does she plan to do with it? At the same time, at the house, Oliver does not like being locked up. He forcefully hits the glass wall until it breaks, injuring his hand without showing any signs of pain. Then he walks to the shed and tries to open it, but failing, he goes to the chicken coop. After the funeral, Laura insists that it should not be a depressing occasion, but a celebration. Realizing that Andy wants to get drunk, when they get home she suggests they drink together. Andy accepts without thinking, but when Laura offers alcohol to Piper, he hesitates. Even so, she manages to convince him by assuring that it is just one drink. Soon the situation gets out of control. Piper's worry disappears and the three of them end up dancing and singing without noticing that Oliver is watching them from outside. Soon after, Piper falls asleep. Andy and Laura are left alone, and either due to the effect of the alcohol or because he really feels it, Andy begins to trust her. So, for the first time, he prepares to talk about his father. To feel more comfortable, they both sit with their backs to each other. Laura decides to start and confesses that she never got over the loss of her daughter, Katie. She says that after burying her, she did not want to leave the cemetery because she felt she was abandoning her. For days, she would stay there to feel close to her. In the middle of her story, she says a phrase that will become important later. I would give anything to hear her say "Mom" one more time. Then it's Andy's turn. He reveals that he had a difficult childhood, marked by his father's favoritism towards Piper. Laura asks him if that was why he hit her. Andy explains that after marrying Piper's mother, his father felt he finally had the family he always wanted. Andy constantly sought his father's attention, even getting into trouble at school, although he only managed to provoke his rejection. He remembers that his father would turn on the shower so that Piper would not hear, and would beat him violently until he was unconscious. In contrast, he never laid a hand on her. Although in a moment of jealousy, Andy did attack his sister, over time he matured and understood that it was not her fault. Since then, he developed a deep affection and a strong protective instinct towards her, reflected in each of his actions. Later, when Andy is fast asleep, Laura enters his room. She then goes to another room where she fills a container with urine and returns to pour it over Andy's pants. Next, she takes his cell phone, gently opens his eyes to unlock it with facial recognition, and deletes a photo he had taken of Oliver. At that moment, she notices Oliver outside the house, lets him in, and takes him to the shower while telling him she knows he's hungry. In a strange tone, she comments, "How will I know you're there if I can't see you?" Just then, a faucet turns on by itself, and in the reflection of the mirror, the image of a demon appears for a few seconds before the mirror shatters. The next morning, Andy wakes up, having wet the bed again. He tries to wash his clothes and sheets without them noticing, but he runs into Laura and Piper. Laura feigns surprise at seeing the wet sheets, and Piper, hearing her, is also disconcerted. Laura suggests he take a shower, and when Andy leaves, she lies to Piper, telling her that the night before he had behaved aggressively, which leaves her worried. Thus, Laura begins to manipulate the information that Andy told her, little by little affecting the trust that Piper had in her brother. Soon after, Laura and Piper go shopping, leaving Oliver locked up under Andy's care. He tries to shower but begins to have hallucinations related to his father, so he decides to shower outside. From there he can see Oliver. The boy, overcome with hunger, approaches an insect and puts it in his mouth. When Andy discovers that Laura has left Oliver locked up, he takes a knife from the kitchen and manages to open the door. Suspecting that the boy is hungry, he takes him to the kitchen and tries to get him to talk. As Oliver refuses to cooperate, Andy gives him a sheet of paper and a pencil to write. To encourage him, Andy offers him a slice of fruit in exchange for one word. When he finishes, Andy gives him the promised piece, but Oliver takes it along with the knife and begins to eat it. Andy turns to look for a plate and, upon returning, is horrified to see Oliver chewing the knife, causing deep cuts in his mouth that soon fills with blood, and alarmed, takes him out of the house to take him to the hospital. However, as they approach the white line at the entrance, Oliver begins to resist. Andy, determined to seek help, drags him to cross it. At that moment, everything gets out of control. Oliver screams, falls to the ground and thrashes as if an immense pain is overwhelming him. Andy, not knowing what to do, watches as the boy begins to choke, and his abdomen trembles as if something inside him is trying to get out. Then, for the first time, Oliver speaks and begs, "Help me." Just then, Laura arrives with Piper. Seeing the scene, she loses control and runs towards Oliver, distressed that he has crossed the line. Upset, she orders Andy to take Piper inside. Although the girl does not understand why Laura is screaming with such desperation, Andy obeys. But what he has just witnessed, added to Piper's constant shouts and questions, causes him an anxiety attack. When Piper hears his broken voice, she stops insisting and manages to calm him down. At that moment, Andy notices the bloody knife and in front of him the sheet of paper on which Oliver wrote a single word: Bert. Meanwhile, Laura rushes to take Oliver to his room. There she plays the ritual tape she had seen nights ago, looking for instructions on what to do now that he has crossed the line. Oliver breathes with difficulty and, confused, seems not to know where he is, who Laura is, or what she wants from him. When he begins to get upset, Laura turns up the music so that Andy and Piper don't hear what is happening. Oliver's screams are drowned out by the sound. Laura soon finds what she must do. She covers his mouth with one hand, while with the other she makes circular movements on his forehead. She repeats the gesture over and over until Oliver stops screaming. His behavior is transformed, returning to that previous state, oblivious to everything, showing no pain, and not saying a single word. Then, worried about Oliver, Andy tries to find out how he is. However, Laura makes him leave and only allows Piper, who cannot see Oliver, to stay with her. Thus, Piper also does not witness the moment when Laura puts the lock of hair she had taken at the funeral into Oliver's mouth. Then, Laura asks Piper to go look for the cat Youngman outside the house. It is then revealed that the white line not only runs across the front, but forms a complete circle that surrounds the entire property. Meanwhile, Andy tries to take a shower when, through the door, he sees the silhouette of his father, who tells him, "She's going to die in the rain." Scared, Andy goes out and discovers that it is not a simple figure. His father is there with his back to him until he turns around and reveals completely red eyes. Andy is startled, slips, hits his head, and loses consciousness. Soon after, he wakes up surrounded by doctors who talk incessantly, but there is something that stands out among all the commotion: the sound of the rain hitting the windows. At that moment, Andy clearly remembers his father's words. "She's going to die in the rain." Convinced that he was referring to his sister, he becomes desperate, tries to get up and return to Piper while the doctors try to restrain him. At the same time, at home, Laura enthusiastically watches as the rain begins to fill the pool. Then, with nostalgia, she reviews recordings of when Katie was still alive. Meanwhile, Piper is worried about Andy and restless about the rain, but Laura reassures her by telling her that Katie loved the sound and smell of the rain. As she continues to watch the recordings, she describes her daughter to her. She was 12 years old, had long brown hair and freckles. Sometime later, Laura visits Andy in the hospital. Although he can't stop thinking that his sister is in danger, Laura informs him that the doctors want him to stay one more day to observe his concussion and evaluate the state of his brain. She gives him a deodorant that, she says, Piper bought for him as a gift. Andy still distrusts her, but with no other option, he tells her that he saw his father and what he warned him about. He asks her not to let Piper out in the rain. Laura promises she won't, but she is lying. At home, Laura does not hesitate to go out with Piper into the garden in the rain. They both have fun as Laura used to do with Katie. Then she takes her to the shed where she puts on her deceased daughter's favorite coat and suggests that she can call her mom if she wants. She also combs her hair as she did with Katie and finally asks her if she would like to stay and live with her when Andy turns 18. Although Piper considers Laura kind, the affection she feels for Andy is stronger. To avoid hurting her feelings, she tells her that she prefers to live with her brother, but that she promises to visit her on weekends. Laura's expression changes. That answer seems to help her make a decision that she was still hesitant about. Then she decides to show Piper something. She takes her hand and leads her a few steps to a freezer, holding her so she can touch something inside. Piper feels the cold and the frost and something repulsive. Laura says it's meat, but in reality it's Katie's lifeless body that she has preserved in the hope of bringing her back to life. However, an inconvenience arises. Andy returns from the hospital earlier than expected. Although he is not yet fully recovered, he is relieved to see that Piper is healthy. That night, while he is exercising, his thoughts overwhelm him. Laura has managed to confuse him to the point that he no longer distinguishes what is real and what is not. For her part, Laura reviews the details of the ritual while watching the tape and drawing circles on Oliver's head to keep him under control. The plan is to replicate the death of the person she wants to bring back, in this case Katie, who drowned in the pool. This is where what she said before makes sense. Many believe the spirit stays in the body for months. The being that inhabits Oliver will consume Katie's preserved body to contain her soul, and then vomit it into Piper's lifeless body. According to the tape, the ritual is effective, and since Piper preferred to live with Andy, Laura believes she has no other option. However, Andy's early return represents a threat. That night, when everyone is asleep, Laura applies Andy's deodorant, goes to Piper's room, who is fast asleep, and gives her a hard hit before leaving in a hurry, leaving her moaning in pain. The next morning, Andy wakes up to an unpleasant surprise. Piper has a large bruise on one of her eyes. He asks her who did it. He suspects Laura or Oliver, but she doesn't know. She only remembers that the person smelled of the deodorant she gave him. Then, Laura turns everything against him. She accuses him of being violent like his father, of having hurt Oliver, and of making the cat disappear. She claims that he is the only one in the house with the strength to cause that type of damage. At that moment, Andy is distracted when he sees Oliver outside in the rain with a deformed face. Convinced that Laura is responsible, he tries to take a photo of her as evidence. Laura, desperate, tries to stop him, but he pushes her away. He then decides to leave with Piper, accusing Laura of not being able to protect her, just as she didn't protect Katie. Piper's pleas manage to calm him down. Andy asks her to go with him, even using their keyword, grapefruit. But Piper, without knowing Laura's true intentions, decides to stay. So Andy leaves, not to abandon her, but determined to seek help. Soon after, he arrives at the social services department to talk to Wendy. However, they ask him to wait, and at that moment he discovers something alarming. In front of him there are several images, but one in particular catches his attention. It is a missing boy named Connor Beard, with long hair, whose face is identical to Oliver's. Worried, Andy bursts into Wendy's office to tell her his suspicions, but Laura has already gotten ahead of him. Foreseeing that he would do something like this, she had contacted Wendy and told her everything that could discredit him, his behavioral problems, his family history, and the psychotic episode related to his father. Meanwhile, Laura takes Piper to play so she can prepare the ritual. However, upon returning, she is in for a surprise. The kitchen is completely messy. The being inside Oliver can no longer stand the hunger and has begun to deform. Its desire to feed is so intense that it stops recognizing Laura and attacks her, tearing a piece of her arm. Terrified, Laura manages to hide in a room while Oliver bangs on the door violently and begins to imitate her voice. Then he stops trying and begins to devour anything. He bites a table until he breaks his teeth and tears long strips of flesh from his own arm to feed himself. When the banging stops, Laura, now recovered, gathers her courage, goes out, and finds Oliver in the garden with his back to her in the rain. She takes the opportunity to use the glass wall and her bloody hand to draw repeated circles until she regains control over him. Then, she takes him to the shed to the fridge where she keeps Katie's body so that Oliver can begin to feed. Meanwhile, Andy tells Wendy his side of the story, assuring her that Oliver is the missing boy in a photograph. Although Wendy is disconcerted, since Laura worked there for 20 years and was considered the best therapist, Andy manages to convince her to go to Laura's house together. The ideal thing would have been to take the police, but Wendy still distrusts Andy, so she decides to go alone. During the trip, Andy calls Piper and confesses that his father used to mistreat him. He admits with remorse that when he was 8 years old he hit her, but he assures her that he is not responsible for the recent blow she received. With tears in his eyes, he tells her that he loves her and that he will go to rescue her from Laura. Unfortunately, it is not Piper who listens to the call, but Laura. Realizing that he might arrive with someone, she hurries to hide the chaos caused by Oliver. Soon after, Andy and Wendy arrive at the house. Wendy asks Andy to wait in the car while she inspects the place. Laura receives her wrapped in a bathrobe that hides her injured arm. Wendy walks through each room without finding anything suspicious. Meanwhile, Andy, fearing the worst, decides to enter through the back of the house. There he discovers several loose chickens, some of them lifeless, and follows the trail that leads him to the shed. Upon opening it, he finds the horrifying scene of Oliver devouring Katie's body. Inside the house, Wendy is about to leave when she notices that Laura's wound is starting to bleed. Just as she hears Andy calling her from outside, Laura tries to stop her and, in a fit of hysteria, lets slip her plans, although they make no sense to Wendy. With effort, she manages to free herself from Laura, leaving her screaming as she runs to meet Andy. Without wasting time, Andy guides her to the shed where Wendy, horrified, confirms that he was telling the truth. They both run to the car to get help, but without warning they are rammed by Laura's vehicle. Wendy dies on the spot. Andy, injured but still alive, tries to breathe with difficulty. Laura approaches him and plunges his head into a puddle. He struggles but is too weak and finally loses his life. Soon after, Laura goes in search of Piper, who cannot see that the car mirror is cracked. When she gets home, she also doesn't notice the blood-stained floor, but she does hear an unknown doorbell. It is actually Wendy's, so Laura makes up an excuse and leaves Piper alone for a moment to go and turn it off. During her absence, Piper hears her brother's voice coming from the upper floor. She decides to follow it without knowing that it is actually Oliver imitating Andy. Although the voice is similar, Piper perceives something strange in his tone and way of speaking. Moments later, Laura appears, takes Piper out of there, and reveals that it is Oliver, though without giving further explanations. Noticing the lie, Piper runs and locks herself in a room. Laura tries to reason with her, but Piper discovers that she is not alone. As she touches the floor, she finds a body. She carefully feels it until she recognizes Andy's braces. She tries to wake him up, but it is useless. Soon after, Laura manages to get in. She lies by saying that Andy had an accident, and with an unsettling calm, she gradually reveals her plan until she confesses that she plans to drown her in the pool. Terrified, Piper throws an object that hits Laura in the face. She then tries to escape, but in her flight she hits her head hard and loses consciousness. With effort, Laura drags Piper to the pool, whose water level is deep enough to drown her. Oliver has also arrived there with a swollen stomach after eating excessively, ready to vomit Katie's soul. Convinced that she is doing the right thing, Laura submerges Piper's head in the water. Just then, the girl regains consciousness and begins to kick, but Laura, being stronger, manages to keep her down. Piper, out of air, begins to fill her lungs with water and stops fighting. Laura thinks she has succeeded until Piper surprises her by scratching her face and freeing herself just in time to shout a single word: "Mom." That word causes a radical change in Laura. At that moment, she understands the seriousness of her mistake. Full of remorse, she asks Piper for forgiveness and lets her go. The girl flees. Although Oliver tries to stop her, Piper gives him a strong kick and manages to break free. Oliver, unable to contain what he has ingested for any longer, vomits. At the same time, Piper manages to reach the road and ask for help. Meanwhile, Oliver approaches the line that keeps him contained. On the ground, he finds a sheet of paper with his photograph, and as if that motivates him, he gathers the necessary courage to cross that limit that the entity inside him has always avoided. At the same time, Laura arrives at the shed and finds her daughter's disfigured body. At night, Piper cries while listening to the voicemail message that Andy left her. In it, he assures her that he loves her and uses the word grapefruit as a sign that he is speaking sincerely. At that moment, Piper hears the sound of a plane and remembers what Andy once told her, that is how people go to heaven. Meanwhile, the police arrive at Laura's house, where they find Oliver badly injured, trembling with cold and begging for help. The officers rush to help him and finally discover his real name. In the middle of the pool, they find Laura hugging Katie's lifeless body.